arrival was almost unspeakable.
We are all evil in some form or another. I'm not guilty.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.
If I couldn't keep them there with me whole, at least I felt that I could keep their skeletons.
Hello and welcome to the Bad Taste Crimecast. I'm Vicky.
I'm Janelle.
And we've got a great show for you today.
I hope
I'm actually really looking forward to the news that we got at the beginning because it's pretty funny.
Uh-oh.
But we're going to start off real light before going real dark.
Yeah. As we do.
Yeah. So on that note, if this is your first time listening, a special hello to you. But we are going to head over to the newsroom.
Unfit to breathe, our food is unfit to eat. We sit watching our TVs while some local newscaster tells us that today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be. We know things are bad, worse than bad.
So today our news is about a man fighting against the establishment.
Yeah, man.
I'm sure you can identify with this. Actually, I think you'll love this one. So a man named Jamie Gagne recently got into trouble after being arrested and charged for a public display of offensive sexual material.
Okay.
So what was the big offense? He erected a large 7-foot penis that he had carved from a pine tree in his front yard.
I mean, that's art, man.
It is art. But this whole display actually stems from a dispute that he has with the town regarding the construction of his workshop. He was in the middle of constructing it, and the city came and said that it wasn't up to code and issued a stop work order, which he's just like, yo, I just want to finish, mind my own business and finish my workshop. Mm-hmm. But Gagne has said after attempts to contact the city regarding changes needed that the city has just started ignoring his communication. And so he erected this 7-foot penis in his front yard. And one day authorities showed up and said, yeah, this needs to come down. And then, like I said, they arrested him for offensive sexual material. So following that, it was actually moved to his backyard. And then after his arrest, he moved it back to the front yard and spray painted adults only on it.
Okay.
From the prosecutor's perspective, they're saying that this is protecting, specifically, they pointed to children and, not exposing people to this unwillingly. But in Gagne's defense, and he brings this up, he talks about, you go to a park and there's like a statue of a little boy peeing, or like you go to an art museum and there's plenty of statues with, people with their tits hanging out.
Yeah.
Mine's just a statue of a big penis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminds me of, so around here, there's a town called Crystal Lake, and there was a person who had a bronze figure of a nude female, which was very not even close to anatomically correct. Like, there was no definitive, nipples or anything. It was, very silhouetted.
Yeah.
And it was in their it was in their backyard, and you really couldn't see it unless you were walking around on the sidewalk and, stood there and looked at it. You could kind of see, her arms in the distance if you were in a car. And their neighbors got so uptight and uppity, and complain and try to get it removed. The person moved the statue to their front yard. And it wasn't even
I love it.
There was no real definitive anatomy. It was very a generalized figure of a woman. So yeah. I'm really you're gonna throw a fit over kind of a nude person. Oh,
that
just irritates me.
Yeah. Well, and the idea that it's something that's on somebody's private property in their backyard to begin with, which quite frankly is none of their business.
Mm-hmm.
But you see this, I mean, I understand when you have the city come in for like hoarders or something, where you just have so much stuff cluttering up the yard that it becomes an issue, because then you're talking about things like rodents and infestations of bugs and things. I mean, that becomes like a public health issue. But for stuff like this, I mean, this definitely runs into like a First Amendment claim, especially when you're talking about on your own property. So, you know, it's I don't know. Jamie Gagne is planning to fight the charge. He hasn't actually, at the time of recording, had a chance to really look over the charges. I'm sure he will by the time this comes out. But from what I understand, he plans to fight it because, yeah, I think that's definitely lands in a First Amendment territory.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. We're going to move on to Netflix and Kill. This week we are talking about, it's actually a very old documentary from, I believe I'm not even going to say because I want to say it's the 70s, but I could be very, very wrong. No, it wouldn't have been the 70s. It would have been sooner, but it's a little older. Anyway, it's called Four Little Girls. It is actually a Spike Lee documentary. Have you heard of this? It's actually on HBO.
I've heard it, but I actually have not watched it.
Yeah. So the documentary itself looks at and retells the story of the bombing of the 16th Street Church in Birmingham, Alabama in 1963. This was an attack that happened during the height of the civil rights movement, and Birmingham was like sort of ground zero for a lot of these civil rights rallies and things. This attack on the 16th Street Church killed 4 African-American girls, 14-year-old Addie Mae, 14-year-old Cynthia Wesley, 14-year-old Carol Robertson, and 11-year-old Carol Denise McNair, along with injuring another 14 to 22 people. The attack itself was an act of white supremacist terrorism perpetrated by 4 members of the Ku Klux Klan, although, interestingly enough, and I feel like this was pretty common for the time, the FBI didn't bring charges against anyone until 1977.
Yeah.
And even then, they only convicted one of the members for the murder of Carol Denise McNair. 2 more of the KKK members were tried and convicted of 4 counts of murder in 2001 and 2002, and the 4th was never charged because he died in 1994. This attack gave a lot of push for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to be passed. However, there is a lot of history looked at a time where a lot of people are trying to educate themselves on the history of racial injustice and the history of civil rights. I think this is a good piece to look at because it was kind of a bit of a turning point. I think there were a lot of attacks like this that were happening at the time, but to hear from people who were the family of the children that were killed or people who lived through this time is invaluable. So I highly recommend that you check this out. It is currently available on Hulu for free, but it's also on HBO. It's called Four Little Girls. Definitely check it out. That's kind of what I got to say on that. Yeah. But I definitely think it's worth watching. Mm-hmm. This is that part of the show where we say content may not be appropriate for all listeners. That disclaimer is going to be very relevant today. I know my case is pretty gross, we'll say. It gets a little nasty.
Oh, goody. I'm glad I didn't eat lunch yet.
Yeah, how's that snack you just had? I hope it's sitting okay.
Oh, yeah, it's doing good so far. Mine's not that gross, so we'll end it on a not too nasty note.
Oh, good. I mean, we're good at trying to
there's
do
still
that.
Murder, but...
So today we are looking at cases where criminals kind of had to adapt and change the way they were committing their crimes. Because you actually see this a lot when you're talking about things like serial killers, where they kind of start with one method, and as they kill more people, it becomes more refined. They kind of learn what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, and you often hear it too called like escalation as well, in terms of intensity and things like that, going from something that's maybe not so violent like strangulation to something more violent.
Yes, yeah. So we're going to start today with a story that combines two of my favorite things, which is white-collar crime and murder.
Ooh, mine's going to be too.
Ooh, I am excited.
Ooh. Double dipped.
So we're going to start off with the story of John George Hay. And I'm going to take you back a little bit to the early 1900s.
Okay.
So Hay was born in Stamford, Lincolnshire in 1909, but he grew up in Outwood, West Riding of Yorkshire. That is actually the name. West Riding of Yorkshire is the name of the place.
England doesn't make sense.
Yeah. They have a lot of crazy names like that. Mm-hmm. Now, his parents, John Robert and Emily, were members of a conservative Protestant sect called the Plymouth Brethren. Now, I had to do a little looking into this because it does play a role in this case. Now, the Brethren, as they are colloquially referred to, which I don't actually think they like being called just the Brethren, but that's kind of how they're referred to. They are a Christian movement that believes, above all else, the Bible is the absolute authority for church doctrine. They don't really consider themselves like a Christian denomination, but rather consider themselves a group of like-minded people. One of the more controversial beliefs that I've seen is this refusal to associate themselves with people who are not part of the Brethren, which is something that has cult experts looking at the group as more of a cult than a religious organization, because that is kind of common, cutting off like your ties to other people. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting little part of Christianity, I think. I also want to say, too, like when I'm talking about the Bible being the absolute authority for church doctrine, they're talking about like over pastors, over preachers, over church, whatever. It's like the Bible to the letter. Now, likely because of his upbringing, Hay said to have experienced religious nightmares on a recurring basis when he was young, which may have contributed to a pattern of criminal behavior. After finishing school, Hay left to work as an apprentice at a motor engineering firm, but he only stayed there for 1 year. He bounced around in a few jobs after that, including a government clerk, an insurance salesman, and advertising. But by the time he turned 21, Hay had been fired under suspicion of stealing some money from a cash box. In 1934, Hay married a young woman named Beatrice Hammer, who was known as Betty. Now, Betty was 23 at the time, but the two barely knew each other. Like, their marriage was very quick after they had met. And it did not take long at all before the marriage completely broke down. Now, little did Betty know that Hay had been supporting their family by becoming quite the swindler and forging vehicle documents to make money.
Okay.
Surprise. This is how I make my money to support our family. It's all forgery. Shortly after their wedding, Hay was arrested for fraud, and he received a 15-month prison sentence. And while he was in prison, Betty had actually became pregnant before he had gone to prison. So while he was there, Betty gave birth to their daughter, who she immediately gave up for adoption, and then wasted no time separating from Hay before he got released. And Hay would actually never see her again.
Oh, wow.
She was like, peace. Which, smart girl, because it's about to get real messy.
You know it's coming. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to talk about Hay for a second because part of the reason I was so drawn to this story in particular is the comparisons that are made between Hay and H.H. Holmes.
Okay.
He didn't make a murder castle or anything, but his crimes were motivated by making as much money as he possibly could. The best description comes from a book called The Serial Killer Files by Harold Schechter. Says,
amazing author.
Yes. Quote, despite his easy charm and dapper appearance, the brill-creamed hair, pencil mustache, and handsome suits and lemon yellow gloves he wore indoors and out, he was not a ladies' man. But he does go on to say, quote, Hay was blessed with many admirable qualities, industriousness, intelligence, ingenuity. Had he put those traits to legitimate uses, he would have undoubtedly done very well in the world, but he was undermined by his psychopathology, which is just a little foreshadowing there for you.
Oh, yeah. Very eloquent writing, always.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. So following his release from prison, Hay moved to London and took a job chauffeuring for a man named William McSwan, who owned a bunch of amusement arcades. And part of his job was performing maintenance on things like the pinball machines in the arcades. Mm-hmm. But Hay soon became weary of working for other people and once again decided to venture out on his own. So he opened offices in Chancery Lane, London, Guildford in Surrey, and Hastings, Sussex. And he opened these offices claiming to be a solicitor named William Cato Adamson.
That's a mouthful.
It is. Now, obviously, he was not a solicitor, but he sold fraudulent stocks anyway in an attempt to rake in the dough. But the scheme soon ended after someone had noticed he spelled Guildford wrong on his letterhead. Just for those listening, because obviously you can't see what I'm looking at, but Guildford is spelled Guildford. And on his letterhead, he dropped the D in the middle. And so people were like, wait a second.
I mean, it could have just been a typo.
It's just one of those things that I love. It's like, if you're going to do this, you got to get all the small details in line. That's kind of how it works. Right way. Mm-hmm. So he was eventually found out for this, and he was convicted of fraud, received a 4-year prison sentence. But don't worry, he persevered and got right back to fraudulent activities as soon as he was released from prison, resulting in even more short prison stints. Now, it was during one of his prison stays that Hay had an idea. The reason that he was not so successful at his fraud schemes was because he left the people alive to rat him out. He also ran into, and this is this is probably one of my favorite parts of this whole story because it's just so... He had this confidence that you can't... amazing. I wish I had his confidence. But he also ran into this legal idea of corpus delicti. Mm-hmm. And so he thought that he could not be convicted without the production of a body. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this hasn't happened in a while, but it's time for a short little BTC legal lesson. Corpus delicti, literally translated from Latin, means body of the crime. Mm-hmm. But it's actually used to refer to the idea that a crime must be proven to have occurred before the person can be convicted. So you can't just go and say, Joe Schmo stole this money from me when you have no evidence that there was any money stolen, right? It's kind of that idea. But Hay wrongly thought this meant no body, no crime. Which almost okay. And literally the whole time he was like, No body, no crime. I swear. Corpus delicti, yo. But okay. So this would actually come to haunt Hay a little bit later. He did take the opportunity of being stuck in prison to do some research as to the best way to dispose of a body, and stumbled on the story of George Alexander Surrey, who, like Hay, was a scammer, but Surrey's life would come to an end after he was guillotined for a double murder and disposing of the bodies using sulfuric acid to dissolve them.
Okay.
So Hay, who is able to steal sulfuric acid from the tinsmith's shop at the prison, began testing this theory on field mice that he would catch and do like little scientific experiments while he was in prison. So by the time he was released, Hay had completely formed this new plan. Now, when he was released, he actually ran into his former employer, William McSwan, who at this point had started working for his parents collecting rent on their properties. Seeing how successful he had become, Hay decided that his first mark was going to be at McSwan. So one night, he lured McSwan into his basement workshop and bludgeoned him to death using a lead pipe. He then placed McSwan's body into a 40-gallon drum filled with hydrochloric acid. Hay left the body to sit for 2 days, and when he returned, all that was left was this, like, sludge in the barrel, which he then dumped down a manhole. Cool, I guess. It's kind of gross. I think about that, it's like, ooh, gross.
Who only knows what's going on down there?
Right, yeah. Obviously, McSwan's parents began looking for him after a few days, but Hay was somehow able to convince them that he had left to go to Scotland in order to avoid the military draft.
Okay.
Yeah, Hay then used his skills in forgery to attain power of attorney over McSwan's home, and then started collecting the rents for the properties owned by the McSwan family. So he just, like, came in and scooped up his life. Obviously, this could only go on for so long before McSwan's parents began asking more and more questions. And then in 1945, Hay lured them to one of their properties with the lie that William McSwan had come back for a surprise visit. And when they arrived at the property, Hay dealt with them the same way that he had with William, by bludgeoning them to death and then disposing of their bodies using sulfuric acid. With the McSwans out of the way, Hay had a new avenue of income. He began stealing William's pension checks and decided to sell the other properties that had belonged to the McSwan's family, netting him around £8,000. Now, with this money, Hay moved into the Onslow Court Hotel and began searching for another mark. Dr. Archibald Henderson and his wife Rose had decided around this time to sell their house, and seeing yet another scam opportunity, Hay showed up pretending to be interested in buying the property. In one instance, he had managed to get inside of the home. When he got in, he actually stole a gun from the Henderson's residence. Now, Hay, in the meantime, moved from the hotel into another workshop in Crawley, Sussex, taking his barrels of acid with him into the new workshop. Following the move, Hay lured Archibald Rose to the workshop under the pretense of showing him an invention. When he arrived, Hay shot Archibald in the head with the gun he had stolen from the Henderson's residence. But his wife was still alive and would be looking for her husband. Don't worry, he had a plan for that too.
Oh my gosh.
He called Rose to say that her husband Archibald had fallen ill and urged her to come to the workshop. When she arrived, Rose was also shot, and both her and her husband Archibald were placed into the barrels of acid. Shortly after their murder, Hay once again used his forgery skills to make a fake letter and sold off basically all of the Hendersons' possessions. Of course, this was not enough for Hay because he's all about that money, money, money. He needs more, more, more. And so while he was living at the Onslow Court Hotel, he had actually met a widow named Mrs. Olivia Durand Deacon.
Very official.
Yes. Now, 69-year-old Durand Deacon had been living at the hotel for 6 years and was rather well off. I feel like this is not a thing that happens as much anymore, but people used to just like live in the hotels.
Yeah.
Especially if you had the money to do so, and if you were like a widower or a widow as she was. When the two had met, Hay told Mrs. Durand Deacon that he was an engineer, which was so lucky because she had this crazy idea that she wanted somebody to help her with: artificial nails. Like fake nails.
Okay.
It's like, she could have been the inventor of fake nails. So Mrs. Durand Deacon asked Hay if he would consider helping her with the idea, and he said he would think about it. And not long after this, Hay invited Mrs. Durand Deacon to his workshop to discuss this idea that she had. But when she arrived, she was shot in the back of the neck, stripped of all of her furs and her jewelry, and then her body was placed into a drum of sulfuric acid. Now, Mrs. Durand Deacon was actually expected at an appointment the following day, and when she failed to arrive, her friends began asking Hay if he had seen her. Hay confirmed that she was supposed to come to the workshop to discuss her idea, but that she had never shown up. And her friends waited about a day or so longer for her to surface, and she never did, and so they reported her disappearance to the police. Obviously, the police were extremely suspicious of Hay from the start, and after looking into his criminal history, they decided to search his workshop.
Oh.
While they were there. Yeah. It's one of these things where it's like, you don't keep everything. I think that's what brings a lot of serial killers and stuff down, is they keep mementos and stuff.
And fucking journals and shit.
Oh my God. Never keep a journal. Never. I will say it again. Never. So while they searched his workshop, they uncovered an attaché case that had a receipt from a dry cleaner for a fur and some of Mrs. Durand Deacon's jewelry. Things at this point were not looking so good for Hay. And so, in a very interesting move, he confessed not only to the murder of Mrs. Durand Deacon, but also for the murders of the McSwans, the Hendersons, and 3 additional victims that would never actually be proved. But he still believed that they could not convict him of these crimes without having any of the bodies. Like there's...
Simple man.
In some of their reporting, there's a quote from him where he's talking to police that he says, "How will you, convict me of these crimes without a body?" Like, dude, that's not really how it works, but okay. So it was very apparent soon after almost immediately after he got arrested, that Hay sort of started setting himself up for an insanity defense, saying that the crimes had been motivated by vampiric compulsions, that he had dreams as a child that were dominated by blood.
Okay. Vampiric? Okay.
Vampiric compulsions. So in these dreams, according to Hay, he said that he had dreams that consisted of him driving through a forest of crucifixes while blood rained down, and when he would wake up, he would have an intense craving for human blood.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a stretch, and I do think he had some religious dreams as a kid, but this definitely does not sound like a real thing.
No, not at all.
Little did he know that detectives had continued to search his workshop, and using 1940s techniques, they were able to find additional evidence, including 28 pounds of human body fat, 3 gallstones, portions of a left foot, 18 human bone fragments, and the undissolved dentures of Mrs. Durand Deacon.
Dear God.
They also found the handle of a red plastic bag and a lipstick container.
Okay.
Hay was, of course, brought to trial, and he did attempt to plead insanity, but there was some disagreement between psychiatrist witnesses, depending on who they testified for. The prosecution's witness was the most convincing to the jury when Dr. Henry Yellowlees got on the stand saying, quote, "The absolute callous, cheerful, bland, and almost friendly indifference of the accused of the crimes which he freely admits having committed is unique in my experience." When the trial finished up and closing arguments were done, it took the jury literally a matter of minutes to return with a guilty verdict, and Hay was sentenced to hang in 1949. Hay's horrific crimes earned him the name the Acid Bath Killer, and he's inspired pop culture quite a bit, including having his own waxworks display in the Chamber of Horrors at Madame Tussauds Museum in London. And there was a play called Wax that was written by Michael Punter, who the whole storyline between this play is it's the woman who is creating his waxworks display for Madame Tussauds goes and meets Hay while he's in prison in order to create this waxwork. And that's like the premise of the stage production. I was like, huh, that's interesting. He's also, I mean, there's a lot of like bands who have written songs about him and stuff, like metal bands and things. But anyway, that is a story of Hay, John George Hay, and kind of how he solved his fraud problem by dissolving people in acid.
Yep, that'll do it. All right. So, for my story, there's a lot of similarities between our stories. So I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, we kind of inadvertently did.
I love when that happens.
A white collar to murder. So
I love when that happens. It makes for a very cohesive episode.
Yes. For my pick, I decided to cover the case of Dorothea Puente. And as I'm telling this, you're going to see a lot of similarities. So, buckle up. Mine's not as...
I am so ready.
Mine's not as gruesome, though, so that's good, I guess.
Yeah. This is supposed to be us ending on a lighter note.
I know. I mean, slightly lighter. Just like a shade lighter. Dorothea Puente was born Dorothea Gray in 1929 in California. She had a childhood that was not at all even remotely happy. Like, her parents were abusive alcoholics. They barely fed her. She was left alone all of the time. Nobody paid attention to her. Eventually, what wound up happening is her parents died, and no one was able to take care of her, so she was put into an orphanage.
Oh.
So while she was in the orphanage, she also was abused. So she did not have a great childhood, and she did not have a great start, and she was very poor. At only 16, she married for the first time. Needless to say, Puente had really terrible trouble with men. She had 2 daughters with this man, one of which went to live with relatives, and the other ended up being put into an orphanage as well. After a miscarriage, which her husband blamed on her, they filed for divorce. In order to make ends meet, Puente started a life of petty theft and check forging. So she was caught forging checks and was sentenced to a year in jail, in which she only served 6 months.
Okay.
She had another child shortly after her release from prison due to an affair with a man, and she had a daughter. The man was not at all interested in being with Puente. In fact, he was still married.
Oh.
And so she gave the daughter up for adoption as well.
Okay.
Lots of kids being sent to orphanages in this story. And we all know how orphanages were in this time period. So
Oh my God, yeah.
not good.
No.
So she then married Axel Johansson and had a really terrible 14-year marriage to this man. Like, he was abusive, possessive, also an alcoholic. It's just like par for the course for her.
Yeah.
So far, I'm like, I feel really bad for this person. Their life has just been a train wreck, right?
Yeah.
So around 1960, Puente started managing a brothel.
Whoa,
Now,
okay.
brothels, 0 to 10. Brothels were illegal in California. And so she got in trouble for this and was jailed for 90 days for the illegal running of a brothel. Now, she was released, and immediately upon her release, she was arrested again for 90 days for vagrancy.
Oh my gosh.
So she's like in and out of jail nonstop. So once she gets out, she realizes that she needs to like find something that's stable, at least try not to put, herself into a position of being put into jail again. She's like obviously not a good criminal. She's like, let me figure out something that's slightly more legitimate. So she decides to go into nursing.
Okay.
She started as a nurse's aide and then moved into elderly care. Now, at this time, you didn't really have to go to school to become like a nurse's aide or to deal with the elderly.
Okay.
You just kind of have like a training program. It's still kind of that way in assisted living care facilities. You don't, unfortunately, really need that much training unless you're the head nurse.
Ew.
Which is a very scary thought, and why I fully am okay with euthanizing myself before I get to that point.
Oh my God. No.
I'm just gonna walk off a cliff when I'm 75.
Oh my
That
God.
was a deep, dark hole we just went into. So, she started working in elderly care, and during this time, she met her next husband.
Hey.
Hits keep coming. Roberto Puente was her next husband, which is the name that she would keep the rest of her life. Puente was 19 years younger than her, and they had a very fast, very violent marriage of only 2 years.
Oh my gosh.
Again, par for the course, another abusive. I don't know if he was an alcoholic. I don't think he was, but very abusive, very demanding and commanding. So while they were married in that short time, she purchased a blue Victorian mansion in Sacramento. Okay. This would be the start to her building out a boarding house to run.
Okay.
While building her boarding house, Puente married one last time. Again, this was a very short-lived marriage. She kicked him out in 1976. I think they were together for like 6 or 8 months.
Okay.
She has a horrible, horrible time with men.
Yeah.
After she kicked him out, her plans were in full swing. She was ready to, invite people into the boarding house. And the home had space for up to 16 individuals. Puente advertised it as a refuge for the unwanted, the elderly, and the mentally unstable. Those who could not function in society without help, and the unhomed were the people that she targeted.
Okay. So, definitely going after these marginalized groups, huh?
Oh, definitely. She was really well known because she had been working in nonprofit organizations, and she was very, praised for her community work and her outreach, and, nobody said anything about her boarding house. And, in fact, she actually was pointed out in one of Governor Jerry Brown's speeches at a nonprofit organization's charity ball for her charity work.
Interesting. I feel like a lot of people who do real bad things hide behind charity work quite a bit. Okay.
Now, no one was really suspicious of Puente, but there was definitely a series of strange events starting to happen in her boarding house around 1982. So, in April of 1982, Ruth Monroe, who was 61 years old, was found dead from what was deemed as an overdose of, wait for it, codeine and acetaminophen.
Can you overdose?
Like you shouldn't be able to overdose from that stuff, right?
Well, I know not with acetaminophen. Can you overdose with codeine or no? Is that not a normal thing?
I don't think. I mean, in my recollection, I don't think you can die from it unless you have an allergy. And I know acetaminophen can cause different, like, blood disorders and liver damage and things if you take too much of it. But I just read that and I was like, I've never heard of...
I don't believe that.
Anyone. Yeah, so very suspicious.
Yeah.
It was ruled as a suicide.
Okay.
Not even like an accidental overdose. It was ruled as a suicide. And Puente had told authorities that Ruth seemed very depressed because her husband was terminally ill and was on the verge of dying.
Okay.
So later in that year, Puente was convicted of robbery. Okay. And she was also convicted of administering stupefying drugs to commit robbery. Okay.
Is that an
this
actual...
is literally in the police report.
I was going to say, is that an actual charge?
Drugs.
Stupefying drugs.
Yes. So drugs, like to knock somebody out, like Rohypnol, for instance.
I wish that was still a regular thing that people... Well, I don't want to say I wish people were getting charged with it regularly, because that would mean there's too many, people putting roofies and shit into drinks, but I just love the term stupefying drugs.
I know. That got me real good.
So good.
So this came from an accusation of drugging and stealing from her clients and a man that she had met in a bar. So, a couple people were like, listen, I think this lady did this to me. They didn't really have any, definitive evidence of the stupefying drug comment, but they definitely had evidence of her taking things from people.
Okay.
So she went to jail and she served 3 of a 5-year sentence. So she was only in jail for 3 years that time, and then she did 180 days, and then she was in jail for a couple months. So she's racking up her time in jail right now.
Yeah.
Now, there were stipulations to her release. Upon her release, she was not allowed to run a boarding house anymore.
Okay.
Now, that sounds like, okay, I could do any number of jobs. No big deal. Wrong. While she was in jail, she started a pen pal relationship with Everson Gilmuth. The two hit it off and were dating. They even opened, I don't know why this is such a point in the story until I read a little bit further, but they were they were so in love, they even opened a joint bank account together. And I was like, okay.
Girl, that's a really big step in any relationship.
I have never had a joint bank account with anyone I've been with. So
that's honestly probably really smart. It's probably smarter not to, even if you love someone so much. Probably really smart.
It doesn't matter.
No.
I am a financially independent woman.
Yes,
okay? Girl. You come to me for money. I don't come to you for money.
Yeah.
But yeah. So she was hitting it off. They had a joint bank account. Everything was beautiful. And he had decided to come and live with her in the same house that was formerly a boarding house, or so we think.
Okay.
But then all of a sudden, Everson Gilmuth disappeared. Puente told people that he went back to Los Angeles for a little bit. And his friends and family members were still receiving what seemed to be correspondences from him in the mail. Mm-hmm. And his support checks were also being, deposited into their joint bank account.
Oh.
So it seemed like he was still alive and well. You know, he was doing all the things that a person who was living and breathing would do. Mm-hmm. Foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So not long after Gilmuth kind of seemed to move to Los Angeles, Puente hired a handyman to help her out, building up a few things in the house, fixing a few things here and there. So she asked the man, Ishmael Flores, to make her a box. She wanted this box to be 7 feet in length and 4 feet wide. And it didn't say the depth, but it was about coffin-sized.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Okay. She then told him that she was going to fill this box with all of the personal effects of her boyfriend and bring it to him in Los Angeles because she felt like their relationship was done.
Okay.
Seems plausible. Okay.
Right.
Now, after the box was built, Flores came back the next day to help her load it and realized that it was already loaded and nailed shut and extremely heavy. Like 200 pounds heavy.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Now, he helped her load it into his truck, and they are on their way to Los Angeles to give the box to Gilmuth. But on their way there, she decides, you know what? I don't even care. I'm just going to dump this box in the river.
Oh my God. Those women and their fickle emotions.
She said she didn't care anymore, and she dumped the box in the river. And the man, Ishmael Flores, was like, okay, that's fine, whatever. Didn't think twice about it.
My God.
Now, the next month, in January of 1986, a fisherman found that same box, which contained Gilmuth's remains. And his remains actually weren't identified until 1989. So nobody knew that he was found, dead in a box.
Right.
Now, Puente was still operating her boarding house, which was a violation of her parole. She was like, you know what? I'm going to still do it. She did it on the down low. She was letting people stay at her residence and helping them to cash disability and Social Security checks. Now, there's some really weird rules regarding assistance in receiving payments if you're a homeless person.
Okay.
It's pretty impossible unless you have the assistance of someone else. And I was looking through the information, and what you have to do is you have to have a representative payee in instances where you don't have a home in most states in order to receive a check.
Okay.
So what that representative payee does is they're basically like a co-signer, and they have to sign your check and they have to cash it for you, essentially.
Okay.
So you can receive a check if you're homeless. You can have it delivered to an address. You can have it delivered to a person. You can have it delivered to a post office box. Mm-hmm. But you can't cash it. And a lot of banks won't let you have a bank account unless you have a street address. So this is where all of the confusion and things come into play.
Gotcha.
So that is why she was... That's why she was the representative payee for most of the people within the household.
Okay.
So because she was operating an illegal boarding house, they weren't able to really use her address. And so she said in return that she would make sure that they would get their paychecks.
Okay.
So she had to sign off and oversee everybody's checks, basically. In 1988, Brenda Trujillo began living with Puente, and she was formerly a prison inmate with Puente when she was in jail. Now, upon Trujillo's release, she decided to seek out housing with Puente. While living there, Trujillo accused Puente of drugging her and stealing her money. Now, this was brushed off because Trujillo was an ex-convict and a drug addict.
Okay.
So when she went to police, Puente was like, no, she's just living with me and staying with me. I'm just letting her, as a good Samaritan, stay here free of charge and helping her out. She's still doing drugs. So nobody believed Trujillo.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, typical, right?
Yeah.
Oh, they're a drug addict. We don't believe them.
Of course.
Now, suspicion began to grow even more that year when Judy Moy, who was a social worker, came looking for one of her cases, Alberto Montoya. He was a developmentally disabled man with schizophrenia.
Okay.
So he had a lot of issues. She talked with Puente and was giving Puente was giving her some conflicting stories about where he was, when he was coming in and out. And so she got very suspicious, and she decided that she's going to file a missing persons report. So on November 11th of that year, Sacramento Police Detective John and a couple of his associates went to the residence and noticed Puente kind of acting really suspiciously. They also went into the house, because that's pretty standard if there's a missing person and they're living at a different address. You can go inside the house. And they noticed in the backyard that there was a great deal of disturbed dirt and grass.
Okay.
Like it had been recently dug up.
Yeah.
Now, they asked for consent to dig, which Puente willingly gave to them, and upon digging, they unearthed the body of Leona Carpenter, one of Puente's former tenants. Now, Puente was not initially a suspect.
What?
I don't know why. They didn't mention it.
What?
They didn't say anything about it.
That's
they were just
so
like, she
weird.
wasn't a suspect at first. So they were questioning her, and she was allowed to leave the residence because she said she was going to get a cup of coffee. Okay? Mm-hmm. She fled the scene.
Oh my God. I'm not surprised. Why am I not surprised?
Now, she was gone for a significant amount of time, but she was relatively quickly caught. She was caught after she tried to pick up an elderly man at a bar. He recognized her from the news and called the police, and she was picked up. Yeah.
Nice job.
I was able to actually find a significant amount of information about this case, which included court documents and video footage, which we will link, but I wanted to play a small bit of a tape. Now, there were over 20 boxes of evidence in this case, and within those boxes, there was like 24 to 30 folders in each of the boxes. So there's lots of stuff online that you can go and look. But what I found very interesting is there was a couple boxes of VHS tapes. Now, the tapes included interviews, news footage, and a video of excavation of her property, which I wanted to play for you. Okay. I do have the link down below so that you can watch it too in case you can't hear it from my end.
Okay.
But we're just going to watch the first 5 to 7 minutes of the video, and it's them coming upon, this is after she was arrested and caught. They were excavating her yard to find if there were more bodies. Now, I'm so glad that they did this, but they don't always do this. They blacked out some of the footage so that you're not seeing people's bodies.
Oh, good.
So what you're only going to see if you watch the video is the backyard, holes in the backyard, some clothing, and some things that were buried, the removal of concrete patio, but you will not see any bodies. Okay. So I was kind of happy about that because I started watching this at work and I forgot what I was watching. I'm like, oh my God. And I was like, oh wait, they blacked out all of the gross stuff. So
good. Yeah.
It was kind of a blessing. So I'm going to play the first couple of minutes, and I queued it up here, but it keeps kicking me out. So I might have to restart it. But it is part of an internet archive that has almost everything you could conceivably think of regarding this case.
Okay.
And the VHS tape it's got this very 80s, grainy, wonderful quality to it that's nostalgic.
Yeah.
(11/11/88), and by shovel in hand, we've uncovered bone with material wrapped around it. That's approximately 2.5 feet down below the surface. See where Detective Brown is.
I don't want her to disappear on us. Okay. We wait till the criminalist gets here. Yeah, this stuff. That's pretty good. One vote. It's true. Let's see what we've got.
Yeah. That's the end of it. It looks like a joint. This is cloth wrapped around it. Again, I say 2.5 feet. This is a small garden area. It's about 15 by about 20. Goes on to the back. There was some digging in this area. Also in this area. And right here.
So I'll put the link up so you can watch more videos, but we're going to only play the first couple minutes of it so that you can kind of get an idea. He talks a little bit about the schematics of the yard, what they were uncovering, how deep it was. So, some very interesting information that you can kind of go into a little bit more. But the link for the archive, you can actually look up other court documents as well.
Yeah.
But I thought that there was lots of tapes that you could watch. There was an interview with her that you could watch. There is the excavation of the yard. There's also some really good news footage that you can see. So it kind of gives a nice snippet of the case.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So Puente had killed 8 tenants. Ruth Monroe, who was 61. Leona Carpenter, who was 78. Alberto Gonzalez Montoya, who was 51. Dorothy Miller, who was 64. Benjamin Fink, who was 55. James Gallup, who was 62. Vera Faye Martin, who was 64, and Betty Palmer, who was 78. After they found all these bodies, they were then able to connect the missing persons case for her boyfriend to her, and eventually the body that they found in the river. Now, the trial didn't begin until 1992, and the prosecution stated that Puente used drugs that she received from her doctor, Dr. Thomas Duty, which is a ridiculous, nasty name.
You said Duty.
Yeah. It is spelled, and it is in connotation exactly how you think.
Yep.
So she received drugs from him, and she also used the drugs that her tenants had to sedate them, and then she would suffocate them. They called 130 witnesses for this trial. The defense had a great deal of witnesses that told stories of Puente's charity work and how she was commended by Governor Jerry Brown, which, if you know anything about Jerry Brown, he's also a dirtbag, so, like, not really a commendation.
Yeah.
There's a really great Dead Kennedy song that talks about Governor Jerry Brown. Anyway, frame of reference for everybody.
Yeah.
Now, in July of 1993, the trial came to a close, and the jurors deliberated for 24 days before finding her guilty of only 3 counts of murder, deadlocking on the other 6 counts.
Wow. That's quite a... You know what, for a jury to be out, that's a lot of time for a jury to be out.
That is. There was a lot of consensus that she couldn't have done this because she was also, they said, a feeble old lady. She was about the same age as all of the people that she was murdering. So, yeah. I mean, it is a little bit tricky because she was small. Like, how could you drug and suffocate a person who is about the same age and maybe a little bit larger than you and then drag them down the stairs? So, yeah. Upon further investigation, they were able to kind of lay out her technique. And so she would drug them to sedate them, strangle them, and then leave them in their rooms for a couple days, and then take them downstairs just by dragging them and bury them in the backyard.
Okay.
So, Puente was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She did die March 27th of 2011 at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla at the age of 82. Now, there was some backlash as she was dying, because she was sick towards the end there, that her doctor and the other doctors that she had gotten medication from, and they were never held responsible for their part of, like, over-prescribing the prescriptions to the people. And she was getting a lot of sedative medication for herself, like, to the point where it's like, that's not recommended medically to have that much sedative.
Yeah.
So Dr. Duty came under fire for a while, but they never mounted a case against him. I mean, there was a lot of issues, like prescriptions were filled over the phone, and in some cases, excessive amounts were allowed to be picked up. She was also able to pick up medication for other people and fill the prescription for other people because she was given that power because of they were, homeless or schizophrenic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, people still, like, she maintained her innocence until she died. People still think she didn't act alone. There is a thought that the guy who helped her dump her boyfriend's body was actually aware of what was going on when he built everything and helped her out. And then there's also, that whole part of her doctor just letting her take copious amounts of medication and not thinking twice about it.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't really feel like... I feel like she definitely did it. Based upon her pattern of behavior and her, amplification of her behavior as time went on.
Yeah.
She was definitely driven by money, for sure.
Yes.
And, she grew up in an experience with people who were alcoholics, who had mental problems, homelessness. So she was very familiar with behaviors and patterns and how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't ask questions. And she was in, an area of California where there was a ton of homeless people. And, this is back in a time when people would just let others who have mental issues and disabilities out on the street. Like, there was not really, there's still not really a great process to handle people with mental issues.
Right.
So that's the case of Dorothea Puente. I highly suggest watching some of the videos because it consumed an entire day for me.
I could see why. There's a lot of information in there.
Yeah, but definitely you can see the correlations between both of our cases.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I love when that works out like that. Well, if you are... just listen to this podcast. That's all I got for you this time.
Don't soak anyone in an acid bath instead.
Yeah, there you go.
Welcome to Film Roast.
Hey everyone, Hannah here, the co-host of Film Roast, where two overcaffeinated and underqualified friends talk about all things movies. If you like film factoids, lots of sarcasm, and bad impressions, check us out on iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. You can also follow us on Twitter @FilmRoastShow and like us on Facebook, facebook.com/FilmRoast. Happy roasting!
All right, guys, that has been yet another show for you. A couple of things that we want to touch on. You probably won't hear us talk about TCPF again until it gets a little closer and we figure out everything. But we do want to tell you or remind you that we will still be participating in the Elgin Fringe Festival.
We sure will. It's happening in September. They're changing the format a little bit, though. We will be doing a digital show instead. So more information will be coming out, but you'll be able to purchase tickets to see our live show live on the air on TV or your computer.
On TV.
On TV if you want to cast your, stuff onto your television. I don't know what your fancy setup is.
Yeah, right.
You will be able to watch us in some form or fashion for the Elgin Fringe Festival, and you'll get to see everybody else who decided to participate this year. It should still be a good time. There might be some interactive stuff. Everything's still getting worked out, but go over to elginfringefestival.com to get more information. Check out their Facebook and Instagram. They always are doing updates, and they're really great at promoting who's going to be there, so you'll get to kind of see little tastes of everything that's going to be available.
Yes. If you like this episode, you can find more episodes like this at thebadtastecrimecast.com, where you can also find our donate and merch pages if you want to buy a t-shirt or just drop a little something into our tip jar. We've got tons of extra content over at the Patreon page that I'm sure will be getting expanded sooner or later. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah.
Who knows? Nobody knows.
It kind of goes, it ebbs in and out. I'll put up a ton of content and then it'll, be quiet for a little bit. It just depends on how many people we have,
Yeah, and we're in uncertain times with uncertain schedules, and we try to find time for these things as we can. So you can check that all out at badtastecrimecast.com. In the meantime, I think that's kind of all we got for you today.
Sure is.
Well, our sound and editing is by Tiff Volman. Our music is by Jason Zakshevsky, the Enigma. We will see you in 2 weeks. Stay safe and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Left their bodies on the hillsides along the highway. It was as if a wave of evil washed over this town.
We are all evil in some form or